Hey guys, in this video I wanted to talk about why Canadians need a US ITIN number. If you don't know what an ITIN number is, the acronym is Individual Taxpayer Identification Number, and it's basically a number that you can obtain from the US that will allow you to get personal banking in the US so that you can get legit US bank accounts. This isn't just about cross-border accounts from US banks like TD or RSBC. Those are inefficient and costly. And the thing is, if you lose your Canadian banking relationship or if you leave the Canadian tax system, it gets a little bit problematic to have those cross-border accounts. So what you need is a real legit US bank account with a US-based institution that does not operate in Canada. And that's the important part here, is you want banking from a bank that doesn't operate in Canada. We all know that Canada loves to freeze bank accounts, and they'll cancel your 30-year relationship with the bank if they don't like you. And it's oligopoly in Canada, where there's only like 5-6 banks. So it's a very dangerous situation to be in to only have Canadian banking. And US banking feels very comfortable to a Canadian, and it also can have a lot of benefits. So in this video, we're going to talk about why this matters, how to make it happen, the hard numbers, the IRS rules, and some banking options that you have. So taking a step back again, an ITIN is a 9-digit tax ID issued by the IRS in the US for individuals ineligible for a Social Security number, but required to file US taxes if you need one. But just because you have an ITIN doesn't mean you need to file the US, which confuses a lot of people. So Canadians need it if they earn US sourced income. If you're freelancing for US clients, if you're collecting dividends from US stocks, or renting out a US property. Without an ITIN, the IRS mandates 30% withholding on payments like dividends, interests, or royalties, and you can't file to reclaim overpaid taxes. The US-Canada tax treaty can reduce these rates to 15% for dividends or 0% for interest in many cases, but claiming those benefits requires an ITIN and filing some forms like the non-resident alien tax return. So I know it gets complicated. The original use case for most Canadians, and again, sorry for the noise, but I got to have the window open. But the original use case was a lot of Canadians would have like a property in the US, and maybe they'd rent out that property. You have a place in Florida, you rent it out when you're not there, and so you would need an ITIN. Well, now a lot of the use case is for digital nomads, expats, and Canadians that really just want to internationalize themselves and not be 100% dependent on the Canadian banking system. You know, freelancers, investors, these are all use cases. But we could go into a little bit of detail about some of the use cases, and maybe that's worth doing actually. So let's consider freelancing. So if you're earning money from a US client, without the US client, if you're using a platform like Upwork, they're going to withhold 30% before the money even reaches you. But with an ITIN, you can file Form 1040-NR, claim treaty benefits, and deduct business expenses. Your taxable US income drops, and you recover most of that withholding. So that's pretty interesting, right? In 2025, I saw a statistic that 22% of Canadian freelancers work for or with US clients per Stats Canada. So this is actually a very common scenario, and without an ITIN, you also can't issue 1099 forms to yourself, which complicates payments and reporting. For investors, which means really any high net worth individual, the stakes are high as well. Canadians hold billions in US securities, the S&P 500, ETFs, tech stocks, REITs. US brokers withhold 30% of dividends unless you provide an ITIN and Form W8BEN to claim the treaty's 15% rate. So for example, if you had 100K in US stocks yielding 2%, paying you out $2,000 annually. Without an ITIN, you lose $600 to withholding right there. With it, only $300, and you can file to optimize further. Real estate gets even worse. Rental income from a U.S. property faces 30% withholding on gross receipts without an ITIN. You can't deduct expenses like mortgage interest or maintenance unless you file the Form 1040-RN. Selling U.S. property triggers a bunch of withholding. There's one called the FIRPTA. You can look it up. Obviously, a little bit in the weeds here. But only with an ITIN can you report it correctly. So this is all very critical. So now let's move on to banking. With an ITIN, you can get real U.S. bank accounts with institutions like Chase, Bank of America, PNC, and lots of smaller regional banks as well. You can get U.S. routing numbers and account numbers for seamless domestic transactions. This is going to make it easier to pay other people, clients and providers that you have in the U.S., and also with less fees. Canadian cross-border accounts actually take advantage of people in a lot of ways. So those cross-border accounts from the big banks like RBC and TD, they route through Canada and they incur 1 to 3% FX fees and also wire transfer costs. And they basically do a lot of markup costs. Like, you're not getting the best deal on your banking if you're going through a cross-border account. The best deals are with direct U.S. bank accounts, which have the best deals on banking in the world. And having a real U.S. account means faster payments from U.S. clients. You can accept Zelle, which is basically like in Canada we have the e-transfer, and in the U.S. they have Zelle. And you kind of need a real U.S. bank account to have Zelle, and that way you have no delays and no conversion losses either. For e-commerce sellers as well, if you want to be on Amazon US, or you want to be on Etsy or TikTok Shop or all these things, the payouts require a US account for same-day deposits. And ideally, you want a real US account. And so if you're moving money from these cross-border accounts, you're losing a lot of money in fees from the FX fees, the wire fees. They take fees all these different ways, and having a US account really cuts that to near zero. Opening a US account as a Canadian is straightforward with an ITIN. Most banks, Bank of America, all the big banks accept ITINs with the passport as well as the secondary ID. And often that secondary ID can be a Canadian ID as well, like a Canadian driver's license. And you don't always even need a US address. You can often use your Canadian address with the ITIN. Although if you want a US address, that can make it easier to do business as well. And there are services that help. MyLatinLife, we have a US address service. We have an ITIN service. So we can get you all these things. Now, it is a bit of a moving target. You may have heard that it's getting harder to open a bank account with an ITIN. But there's so many banks in the US that you're always going to have options. The problem with Canada is, again, you only have like 5-6 banks. It's an oligopoly. But in the US, you have the big banks like Chase and PNC and Bank of America, but you have all these regional banks as well all over the country. There are banks that only operate in Texas. There are banks that only operate in certain states, right? These regional banks, there's credit unions, there's all these different things. So there's always going to be a bank that allows you to open with an ITIN. These accounts also offer FDIC insurance up to $250K USD, which is good. And again, they integrate with all the US payment systems, unlike Canadian bank US dollar accounts that still clear internationally. So you're going to get greater access to the US market, access to Stripe, PayPal, all these different things that you need to run your business. Without an ITIN in US banking, you face serious downsides. Tax-wise, unclaimed US income risks CRS penalties, all right, up to $2,500 per year for unreported foreign assets over 100K on Form T1135. The IRS can also impose 20% penalties for inaccurate filings or late returns. Under FATCA, the IRS and CRA share data, increasing audit risks for noncompliance. Banking-wise, sticking with Canadian accounts means higher costs and slower transactions. I hate paying $20 for incoming wires. I hate 2% FX spreads. It's insane. I hate the withholdings, right? A single 10K payment loses 30% to withholdings. That's $3K, $3,000 that you may never recover without an ITIN. And probably the worst thing is just not having full access to the US market. It's a game changer to have a real US bank account, to have Zelle, to have ACH, to be able to receive money, to be able to get access to financial services, payment processors. And it's going to help you make so much more money. It's going to help you diversify. And if you ever get locked out of the Canadian banking system, you ever get your account closed at TD or RBC, maybe due to crypto transactions, which happens to a lot of people, or maybe you want to escape the Canadian tax system and you need to, basically reduce your activity in Canada, which we help a lot of our clients do, then you need to start banking outside the US. If you want to keep living in Canada, cool. Then the ITIN is really going to help for diversification purposes and potentially some tax savings as well. And then if you want to leave Canada, you want to escape the Canadian tax system, which we talk about a lot at MyLatinLife, then having an ITIN in US banking is going to be a key part of your personal financial structure. So if you're interested in applying for an ITIN, there's a link in the description. We have a service for this where we can get the ITIN for you. If you'd like to speak to us before placing an order for the service, you probably still have a couple questions. There's also a link in the description where you can book a call with us. We can talk about your holistic scenario. We can talk about escaping Canada, leaving the Canadian tax system, your personal financial structure, and how the ITIN and US banking fits into that. So in 2025, with 1 in 5 Canadians earning US income, an ITIN and US banking is non-negotiable. It's just a no-brainer. It's going to reduce your taxes, eliminate fees, streamline payments, and give you greater money-making potential, as well as potentially helping you leave the Canadian tax system if you're a digital nomad, you're an expat, and you want to stop paying 50% income taxes and all that. So if this is of interest to you, I hope this video kind of opened your eyes to the possibilities. I find I'm constantly educating Canadians about the ITIN and about the possibilities and about the importance of having true US banking as a Canadian. If you've got US income or you want US income, act now. Link in the description to book a call with us or to order the service. And at a bare minimum, I hope this video was eye-opening. I hope you learned something here today. And if you did, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video. Ciao for now.